Hello. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for having me here today. And I would also like to thank all of you that you came here to listen my talk. And even it is pretty early, and yesterday party was for late hours. You here, so thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I want to be honest with you. I'm very stressed right now, and even after so many years of working, I'm not still much more comfortable in talking English. So, yeah. When I'm stressed, I speed up my presentation, so who knows, maybe after 50 minutes we will be after this talk and you will have a break for a small sleep between talks. So, yeah, when all of that is said, we can start. I had a problem with what to call this presentation. I have a vision what I want to say, but those were small pieces in Ruby, which were not directly connected to each other. So this was very hard for me to find the right title. So I thought about it by myself for a few weeks. Then I asked my husband for help, and then I decided to ask AI. So this is what ChatGPT suggests. Mastering Ruby methodology, unleashing the power of Procs, mapping techniques, and Ruby News to Proc method. So the bar is set high. This talk sounds very serious, even after, even like a university presentation that may be a bit boring. So I asked for another title. Unlocking the potential of Ruby, dive deep into method invocation, Proc utilization, and intricacies of map and to proc. So I like this part, unlocking the potential, but the rest still sounds very boring and theoretical. So I asked again, and after some tweaks, I got it. Ruby Rendezvous, method call, Proc, and beyond. And I think that's a pretty nice title. It's interesting, but without too many technical words. You may say it's marketing. Well, what can I say? But based on that titles, you should more or less know what the presentation is about. This will be not about race event store. This will be more about Ruby itself. But did you know that this is not my first speech on this stage? The first time I was a Wrocław RB ghost speaker in 2020, the pandemic year. So the funny thing is that people congratulate me my first speech on this conference, even we didn't have the conference that year. So yeah, as already Andrzej said, I joined the Ruby community around 2011, 2012, and that's over 10 years ago. And even after every time when I come here to Wrocław, I feel a bit nostalgic. So well, maybe even more than a bit. So be aware that this talk can be a little bit nostalgic too. I started with Ruby 1.9.3 and Rails 3.0. And I even remember the old logo of Wrocław RB. I wasn't in all editions, but maybe some of you were here. So do we have someone like that in the room? Yeah, okay, nice. Okay. I also remember the What Lightning talk from 2012. It's not from this conference, but it's worth a look. And by the way, all the links and sources are at the end of the presentation, so don't worry, I will just share that with you. I also will give you the slides, so yeah, we can go back to the topic. So I like this lightning talk so much that I started looking for fun, interesting, and little-known Ruby flavors. And here we are. I would like to share some of them with you today. And I hope you will find something that you didn't know about Ruby during this talk. But first, let's take a look at what's changed between the What Lightning talk and the current version of Ruby. So first, A equal A. In Ruby 3.2, it's still nil. Ruby has no bare words. It's still throwing the exception. And if we declare the method missing in the IRB, we will get a stack level too deep and the console close. So the bare words trick no longer works in the Ruby console like it was before. And it was, for me, real magic when I first saw it. So it's sad that this is not working anymore in the Ruby console. But we can do something like this. So it will work. We can combine multiple strings with spaces between them without any additional method in Ruby. We can also mix different ways of declaring strings, and we can do it in multiple lines. And it will work not only in the last Ruby, but also in older versions. You can also find this behavior in Python, C, and C++. And you can tell me if you can find another languages that this way of combining strings work also. Okay, but the question how this is possible. So okay, so how this is possible? To answer this question, we need to go to the parse.y file in the Ruby source code for implementation details. So here we are. And this file has notation similar to BNF, Bacchus nor form, which allow us to use meta language to provide the information how the language should look like. And we use, it is used by YAC, so yet another compiler program for parser generation. And the output of it will be in C. But what does this mean? So Ruby is either a tchar, a string one, or recursive definition of concatenation of string one and string itself, which result in string expression being concatenated, as we saw on previous slide. So after that, I was thinking what else could be interesting in Ruby. And for sure, calling a method in Ruby is an interesting topic. We have several ways to call a method, but I will not show you all of them. Greg Vitek wrote a great article about this, where he showed 12 ways of calling a method. I know 2 more, so I will only focus on those 2. I will stick to the same convention as we can see in Greg's article. So we have a user class, and we have a hello method. we can create an object, and we can call a method as we often do. So everything worked so far. The first interesting calling method I found was in Nick Schrederer Ruby archaeologic talk. I hope that I'm pronouncing his name correctly. It was great talk, and if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend it to you. By the way, I like the title Ruby Detective that Nick used to describe what he's doing. And I like also think about myself like a Ruby detective, especially when I'm working with some bug or debugging some problem in the code. Okay, so this way of calling method that he presented was used in the MERP framework. Do you remember that framework? Okay. The time when the MERP core team merged with the Rails core team. It's a pretty interesting story, and if you didn't hear it, I put the link to that at the end. Okay, so the way of calling a method. So we can call a method by using a double colons. And it looks like a class inheritance, but it works. We have, in this case, 13 way of calling a method in Ruby, regards to the Greg article. We can call this double colons operator as a constants resolution operator, or better yet, a scope resolution operator. And we usually use it to manage a scope of the class, classes and modules. So yeah, I think we cannot find too much places to use it to call a method in our code right now. One note that double colon are not exactly the same as a dot, so we can use them interchangeably to call a method, but they not for the manage a scope. So they are not the same. So let's imagine for a moment that user is in the scope of the workplace. So we can use double colons here in this case, but we cannot do it like that because we will get user is not a method of a workplace. Let's stay here for a moment. This kind of calling method, when I first saw it, was new to me. I hadn't heard about it before Nick's presentation. So yeah, it was new for me, but this is not something completely unknown. And you can see a note about it in Rubocop doc, for example. So we have here use double colons only for reference constants. This includes classes and modules, and constructors like RI or Nokogiri HTML do not use double colons for a regular method class. So based on that, we have here, we decide to forget this way of calling a method in a favor of using a dot. And I don't want to judge whether this is a good or bad decision. It's a fact. We prefer a dot compared to the double colons when we call a method. For me, in this case, the most interesting question was, how does this work on the hood? And I think this is not a talk for that, but if you are interested in that topic, I invite you to join me on this on a Stack Overflow question about it. Okay. The 14th way of calling a method is a call of a proc, but in a very specific way. A proc object is an encapsulation of a block of a code that can be stored in a local variable, passed to a method or another proc, and invoked. And proc is an essential concept of Ruby. on the core of its functional programming feature. So we have our proc, and how we can call a method by using a proc. So we can call it in several ways. We can use a call, yield, or square brackets. And all of these ways of calling a method are in the Greg article. But I will show you one more way of doing that. But before that, let's check how this works. So I would like to check the implementation of toProc method for the symbol. I will check that in the Ruby news, which is Ruby written in Ruby. The last update of Ruby news was in 2020, but still it is easier to read it in Ruby than in C, at least for me. Okay, but one more thing. Do you remember the Ion Ruby project, the Ruby in C# from 2011? It was prepared to .NET Framework. It's pretty old time. Okay, anyway. So we have a proc method. And first we set our symbol, which is in self, in a sim variable. We do this because if we use self in the block below, and the block is passed to instance eval, the self become the object install eval was called on and no longer our symbol. So to have we have here the changing of the context. So to have access to our symbol, we need to assign it to the instance variable. Then we create a proc. We combine all the arguments in the args variable, and we have a b variable to represent the block of code. Then we check that we have at least one argument, and we should have one because the method, which is now just a symbol, needs to be called on some object. So the call method needs to have an argument. And if we call the call method without argument, we will get the no receiver given argument error exception. And the most important step, we take the first argument, which is in our case, which in an object, we take a first argument, where is the object we want to call the method on, and we send the method which is in sim variable to it. And then we proceed the rest of the arguments also with the block. So let's check how this will look like for our user example. We have a proc method, then we have in our self hello, so we assign hello to a symbol. We create a block where we check if we have at least one argument, and we have, this is the user object, and then we can call on this user object our hello method without any additional arguments. So we know how the code works, great. Now let me show you another way of calling a proc. I didn't see it in Greg's article, so I asked him about it. Do you know that the call that you can call a proc with a triple equal sign? And Greg replied that he didn't know that approach. Greg also asked a great question: when was it added to Ruby? And the first version of Ruby where I found it was 1.9.1. So this is a pretty old way of calling a proc. So we have this another way of calling a proc by using triple equal sign. And this is good news because since the proc responds to the triple equal sign, and case do that too, we can use a proc in a case statement. So I prepare a method just for the example. In this method, we have a proc, and we create, which will check if the phrase include message or not. And then we have our case. And when we use our message type proc, and the condition is fulfilled, we will return it's a message type. And if not, then we will return other type. So when we call a check type method with a string that does not contain message phrase, we will get other type. And in case we will call this method with a string that contains this phrase, we will, we will get it's a message type. Okay, so what can be even more interesting in Ruby? Calling a method with argument, of course. So the next thing I thought of was how do I call a method with an argument using a proc? So let's go back to our user class. We will create a method sayMyAge. And when I did the name of this method, the first thing which popped up in my mind was a pretty bad joke, but I had a song of Beyonce, Say My Age, Say My Name. Yeah. So we create another instance of user, and we can call our sayMyAge method. And 15 is not exactly my age, but I know that I'm mostly look like a teenager, so I tried very hard today to look more serious, but you can tell me if it works or not. So we can call this method normally, obviously. Okay. So how we will use the proc for that? So we can do it in several ways. We can do it just by putting a second argument in the call or in the yield. So let's check one more time the definition of toProc right now with the argument. So we have toProc. We assign sayMyAge to our sim variable. We have our proc, and then we will have the condition where we check if arg is empty or not, and it's not because we have the user object and also the number 15 here. And then we have we send to the user object our method sayMyAge with 15 as an argument, and without a block. So simple enough. Okay, we can do something like that with a triple equal sign? If we do something like that, we will get an error. But if we will change the space to a dot, everything will work. And it will work because we will not use the operator syntactic sugar anymore, and we will just call it as a normal method. So let's look at other possibilities to call a proc with an argument by triple equal sign. and we can use a carry, not a spice, but a method, and then we can use a square brackets to call an argument. Or we can just do it by a call, like before. I like the complexity of this line, so I want to focus on the carry method for a moment. It will be helpful later in this talk. So we have a carry method. And it allows us to tell the proc how many arguments we need to run the whole logic. So in our case, we have 2 arguments. And if we run the first proc with a lower RET than we declare at the beginning, we will get a carried proc in return. And we can say that this new proc is partially executed, and only when enough arguments have been passed to satisfy the method signature, the method is actually called. And we can do it in this fancy square bracket way. And as you see here, we use double pair of square brackets. We cannot do it in one pair. We will get an exception. And since I talk a lot about procs, let's check the map with ampersand. And I like to use this shortcut whenever it's possible. And people often think that this is shortcut for this line. But to be honest, it's shortcut for this. So we have a call, we call a proc in the map as a block argument. So this is similar to this. We have a proc, and we will call it in our map. So I start thinking, is it possible to call this map with ampersand using an additional argument? So if we do something like this, it will not work. We will get an exception. But there are some ways to do something like that. So in this case, we want to increase the number in our RI by 2, not by 1, as before. So as I told you previously, we cannot do it like this, but we can do it like that. And I would like to focus for a moment on this way of calling that. So we have our 2 as an object, and we are creating a method object by using a method with an argument which is a symbol of plus. And this method is not associated with a specific object. It's associated with a specific object, not a class. So when we call it like we do for a procs, we can provide it. So this can be provided to our map, and the first argument is already there by this 2 object, and the second one is provided normally by RI or enumerable object. So let's check other ways of calling the proc. We can do it like this. So we convert our RI to enumerable object. We inject argument into it. And in our case, this argument is 2. Then we call a plus method with an ampersand as we did previously. And as I say, the second argument will be provided by enumerable object. The second way of calling that is to convert our plus method to a proc, then specify the number of arguments. in our case, we want to have 2 arguments, and we use for that this carry method I told you about previously. And then we can provide the first argument, and in our case, it's also 2. And the rest will be treated as a proc, which can be run in the map. Okay. Since we are talking about maps and ampersand, did you know that you can call a hash with a map in a map? So since hash implements toProc method, we can provide it to a map and run map as shown here, and we will get an RR in return. And it works because when we call a toProc method on hash, we convert it to a proc in a very specific way. And yeah, it's behaved like this. So let's go back one more time to implementation details. This time we will check the toProc method for a hash. So we have on self, we have self, which is a hash. We create a method object on brackets, and we convert it to a proc. So we will get this line, which we can translate it to this one. So hash is the last basic object where the toProc method is implemented. We have this in the symbol object. We have that for a method object and also for the hash. I don't count the proc itself because it is obvious to me that we can call toProc method on a proc. So, yeah. The one more tip I have for you today, related with a map, more specifically with how to use the iterator variable, is that we can do it like we normally do, just by putting an argument in the pipes, surrounded by pipes. Or we can do it like that, so by using the underscore number way. And this will work not only for one argument, but also for multiple of them. So you can use _1, _2, _3, and so on. Yeah, so that's basically all what I want to say. Let's summarize it by using the plus 1 by plus example. So we can use no syntactic sugar to call a method, like here. We can send a to the object. We can send a method to the object, also with the argument. We can call a method by using triple equal sign, or we can do it normally by call. And yeah, that's all. Thank you for listening. You can find me on web on Women on Rails. The slides are on womenonrails.com/presentation. Here you have all the links. And yeah, here are my social media, blog, Twitter, and not Twitter, the X, and so on. So thank you very much. Do you have any questions? I think it's too early to questions.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. It was really fun to learn something new about Ruby. Have you had a chance to use any of these techniques in your projects that you're working on?
This is not something I used very often, but some of those pieces, yes. For sure, the triple equal sign for the proc and call case, sorry. Or, yeah, when you use raise, you always have some small proc parts. Probably some of the examples I show you. It's more like a fun and just interesting topic to think and discuss, but not the production ready solutions. So for sure, I use ampersand with name of the method, but not with the additional argument. Yeah, but some of them I can use in the project, but not too often.
Thank you.
Any other question?
Do you use concatenation of the functions also because there is some functional things which you can call the proc in the proc and pass it within the block? Because I tried to do it, but still it wasn't so easy to read. So, but it's also like the Ruby detective thing to use it, to try it. So that's my question.
Yeah, this is mostly for fun when I do something like that. But yeah, as I say, not on production because it's not so readable like we do that normally with join or plus. Yeah, production.
Apart from readability of those method calls or those techniques which you showed, have you compared, for example, the speed of on? No, okay.
No.
I was
but this is also interesting topic.
Like I was wondering whether either of those provided any other benefit, just other than fun of doing it. Thank you.
Anyone? Okay, so I think that's it. Thank you, Agnieszka. It was amazing.
Thank you.